And we have an update on Paul Ryan's trip to the soup kitchen this week. As you know, Mr. Ryan visited a soup kitchen in Youngstown, Ohio, and did a photo op there, despite its policy against political affiliations. They have that policy for fear of losing donations, and now the manager of that facility says this is exactly what's happening. He tells the Huffington Post there's been a substantial backlash following Mr. Ryan's photo op. So I guess now we know how much damage a Ryan photo op can really do, don't we?
Yeah, this is an unfortunate situation. They kind of thugged their way into the photo op. And the thing is that people have a sort of low tolerance now for politicians that are really just not authentic. And this is as inauthentic as you can be. A photo op where you can't even stay around, talk to the folk, you can't help serve the food.
There weren't any folk there, sir. There weren't any folk there.
Well, even the people who staff the place. I mean, the idea that a politician would come in and do a hit-and-run photo op like this is really disgusting to a lot of people. And it's sad that the actual soup kitchen has to sort of bear the brunt of this. But hopefully Mr. Ryan will circle back and do a real sort of service trip with this group.
Jared, isn't the first rule of politics first do no harm?
Right. No, it's true, and it's very difficult to make, as somebody quipped, it's very difficult to make a trip to a soup kitchen become a negative for your campaign, but they somehow accomplished that. Look, I think the important thing, along with this kind of Potemkin campaign exposure, is to actually look at what the Ryan budget does to low-income programs, and it's quite devastating. He proposes over $5 trillion of spending cuts. More than 60% of those cuts come from low-income programs. By the way, the savings he gets from them goes right to the wealthy through their Robin Hood in reverse tax cuts. But we're talking about cuts in Pell Grants. That's not something you would have heard from Mitt Romney in the debate so far. Food stamps, housing assistance, certainly block granting, Medicaid. You know, these are ideas that very much hurt folks, and if you want to show up and pretend to wash their dishes, you know, okay, but let's talk about your budget and its actual impact on people.
Indeed, and to that point, Jimmy, 18 days to go until the election. Today we saw Paul Ryan leading a roundtable of entrepreneurs for students at the University of South Florida. I note that he was not invited by the university's math department, and again, Mr. Numbers Guy didn't offer any specifics. Is that going to change before the race is over, or do you think Mr. Ryan is going to keep going with no statistics, as Jared just said, no details, no explanation of the math, let's just get to the election?
Well, we have lots of statistics and lots of numbers that have come from his last 3 years of budgets. And so, I mean, and Jared just talked about those, and he talked about them, by the way, in specifics. But let's have a conversation about entrepreneurship and Paul Ryan. Those two things cannot be actually uttered in the same sentence, and here's why. Paul Ryan has worked only for the United States government his entire life, or a conservative think tank.
Do you know, Jimmy, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I've been listening to this nonsense from him as if he's some kind of outsider, had nothing to do with Washington, and yet actually he's been on the government dime from the beginning.
He got to Washington, D.C. right after I did. He waited tables as a poor staffer, by the way, across the Capitol from where I waited tables as a poor Senate staffer. He waited tables, I waited tables. He worked in the House, I worked in the Senate. He was on the government teat just as long as I was. In fact, I take that back. I only worked on the government teat for 7 years as a staffer. He's been there for at least 14 years. But you know what? I guess he knows everything there is to know about how to start a small business and how to be an entrepreneur, because he's down in South Florida talking about it.
He has, you're absolutely right. Jared, Mr. Romney alluded to his small business roots this week.
Right.
Unfortunately for him, Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate of the New York Times, points out that Bain Capital had, and I'm quoting, $37 million when it started, and Mr. Romney was able to raise that money from Central American oligarchs with ties to death squads. So I guess if you don't have parents who can lend you money to start a new business, just go to the oligarchs, is that right?
So,
well, what's that got to do with small business?
No, it has nothing to do with the kind of small business entrepreneur vision they're trying to create, but it has everything to do with the way they think about small businesses. You know, the president talks about tax increases on the top 2-3% of small businesses, businesses, and these guys talk about that's going to devastate the hardware store on the corner. In fact, those businesses are much like the hedge funds, the private equity funds, the top-end law firms. They're the ones who actually started out in this case with $37 million of capital. That is not a small business that's going to be, it's going to bring the economy to a slide if they have to pay their fair share of taxes. So I think it's emblematic of this world view that we're getting from this campaign, that somehow the small business is the private equity firm that outsources jobs to China. Like that's what their economic policy should be crafted on.
It's incredible. Dr. Peterson, redistribution is another word Messrs. Ryan and Romney like to throw around, as you know, as if it possessed magical powers. Yet the Romney-Ryan campaign is now touting a 2006 study in support of their tax plan. And this very same study says that eliminating reductions and loopholes will lead to the, yes, you guess it, redistribution of tax liability from the upper income level to the middle class. So, Doc, I guess when it comes to studies that the Romney-Ryan team, I guess they're better off than, they're worse than the blog post, but they use both.
We've got to do a much better job of defining what an actual study is and figuring out what studies are actually objective. What's going on here is that the Ryan-Romney camp, and really those on the right, have fused their ideology with the sort of philosophy around capitalism and business, and that's the problem. That's why we're going to need a whole lot more soup kitchens and a Ryan-Romney sort of plan, and that's the reason why they're trying to redefine small businesses as someone like Donald Trump or some kind of hedge fund with just a few employees. We have to actually stick to the facts of the matter, and the reality is that our system is a redistributive system. Any system where you pay taxes and they use the resources for infrastructure redistributes the wealth of the common folk to then build bridges, build schools, hire police folk, hire teachers. We're in a redistributive system, so it doesn't make sense to try to demonize the government for the very fiber of its existence. It just doesn't make sense.
Let me say, I agree with that point wholeheartedly, but I will also point out that there are many breaks in our tax code that redistribute income upward. And of course, and it's the hedge fund guys and gals, mostly guys, that are the beneficiaries of that, and that's why Mitt Romney pays 14% effective tax rate when lots of people whose incomes are far lower pay double that rate.
Sorry to correct you, Jared. It's actually 9% if he actually paid the tax rate that he should have paid in 2011 without giving away his charitable donations deduction.
That's a symptom of the kind of tax favorability of that kind of income that those guys are raising.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Jared Bernstein, Dr. James Peterson, and Jimmy Williams. Thank you, Jared.